Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And in this episode, we have a news update for December of 2024. And Justin, we have some interesting updates on the Trump administration's picks for energy and interior departments, which are really the two largest impact on the minerals and royalties and on oil and gas. And so we'll definitely dive into that. And then some interesting developments as it relates to Arkansas lithium. So I was kind of surprised by one of the headlines and the companies that are actually starting to get interested as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, Matt. And, as we suspected, we're starting to see more and more common news on lithium updates, which is good to see as it is progressing forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, do you want to dive into this first article here?
Yeah, let's do it. So Chris Wright, President-elect Trump's pick to lead the Energy Department, has denied the well-established connection between climate change and extreme weather, claiming that storms are not getting more intense. And the article here goes over a quote that he said, which is, "We've seen no increase in the frequency or intensity of hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, or floods, despite endless fear-mongering of the media, politicians, and activists." Wright, the chairman and CEO of fracking company Liberty Energy, said in a video. "The biggest challenge with energy in today's world isn't toxic chemicals and frack fluid. It's the fact that so many people around the world don't have access to energy." So, Matt, this is an interesting one, though the divisiveness of the story is a little bit spooky to see. Hope it doesn't get clogged up and just become a big battle.
Yeah, I tried to find an article that was impartial, but they were all so skewed against fossil fuels that it was hard to find an article that actually talked about Chris Wright, his background, what he's done, and stuff like that. So that was unfortunate, but maybe there are some other articles now. Before I post the show notes, I'll look and see if there's some additional resources out there, additional articles that talk about Chris and his background. But I'm very pleased to see Chris Wright selected to lead the Energy Department because he is, I think, a very balanced person from an energy perspective. He is also very pro-energy, and that includes all forms of energy, whether that is fossil fuels, oil and gas, nuclear. He's a very big proponent of nuclear, and of course, there is a connection. He's a board member of Okla, which is one of the companies that is pioneering small modular reactors. So he does have a financial incentive to do that, but I do think he's looking at it from the standpoint of human flourishing and, what do we need to do to raise the world up, the people that are suffering from energy poverty, that are burning animal dung and wood to cook food and to heat their homes. He's looking at how do we bring those people out of energy poverty? And that is a big issue. I think that when we talk about energy as a whole, one of the biggest issues is that people don't have access to it, and they want access to it, and they should be given access to it. And I think, he's really leading the way in lifting up humanity in that regard. The Liberty Energy Foundation, they have this Bettering Human Lives report, which they issued and which we'll link to in the show notes, which I think is fantastic and really provides an objective look at the benefits of energy and the drawbacks of energy. And that's the kind of person we ought to have lead those types of discussions and those kinds of policy decisions is, really what is going to benefit humanity as a whole and how do we do that objectively? And I think Chris is the ideal pick for that. So that's really exciting to see. And I'm excited to see what he does in terms of hopefully freeing up the access to build new nuclear power plants, because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is under the Department of Energy. And so hopefully he can help streamline that and help really unleash the power of nuclear energy, that we have the ability to really increase the reliability and stability of our grid through access to low carbon energy, which is what nuclear will provide. So I think that as much gnashing of teeth and wailing the left is really having around over this pick, I think that is something they could get behind as well.
You said it, Matt. Yeah. And hopefully he'll keep a nice balanced tone as he speaks to the public, because that'll help to kind of demystify this. And like you said, all the articles really just seem to be slanted one way and talking about how he's pro oil and gas, but we need that holistic approach to energy because it's not a one size fits all. And there's been some progress there. We talked about it in a previous news show, but President Biden, and it looks like this was in July of 2024, he signed in a Fire Grants and Safety Act, which had some big changes to the nuclear industry and allowed and relaxed regulations that allow us to build new reactors. So hopefully we'll continue to build on that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the next article here talks about how Trump has picked Doug Burgum as the Secretary of the Interior. Of course, it has to go through the whole process and approval by the Senate, but I think this is also a really promising pick, and I think he's a good person for that. I didn't know a lot about him, Justin, but after reading the article, it seems like he's balances both the conservationist side of things as well as unleashing American energy.
That's good to hear, Matt. And he's been going through, and this pick seems to be less contested or less hot pick than some of the others, but he's going to have a major swath of land that he's going to be looking over, and he's really pro energy dominance in the global market for the United States. So a good pick, but also understands the full picture where he's talking about having a focus on maximizing the responsible use of the natural resources, which is, I think, the way that we have to move forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great position to have. And, certainly he's no stranger to understanding the balance between energy and conservation, and there is a balance there. And he's been, I think, a very popular governor of the state of North Dakota, a very oil-rich state, and so he certainly understands the need to allow for free market access to energy and how that has benefited his state and how that could affect the rest of the country, by unleashing the federal lands for leasing for all forms of energy. And I think that was something that was, part of legislation that was passed this year, was that they were supposed to have regular lease sales for oil and gas and for wind and solar. And, that's really one thing that is stalled under the current administration. And I don't think they've done a good job of holding up that end of the bargain. And there's a balance, right? So they have only leased 91,712 acres in 2023. And so that was just, obviously 1 year, but under the whole Trump administration, they leased over 1 million acres annually. So that's a huge difference in terms of access to land that takes years to go through the permitting process, through the environmental reviews. And so hopefully they'll be able to streamline that, between Burgum as the Secretary of Interior and then also with this whole new DOGE Department of Government Efficiency, that they can hopefully streamline some of those regulations, get out all the red tape that you've got to go through to get a project permitted on federal lands. And so that'll be good for mineral and royalty owners that have fee minerals, in other words, private minerals that are adjacent to federal lands, because it requires that companies can get access to leases and can create a federal drilling unit that might include your minerals in order to be able to drill a well. So if you're in that position, particularly in the Permian Basin portion of New Mexico, where there's a lot of federal lands, I think that is something that will benefit private mineral owners by freeing up that, which has really been put on hold for the past 4 years.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. And, we've talked a lot about how the industry of oil and gas has really gone for stability. Don't do explosive growth, but it'll be interesting to see how they react to some of these changes if it relaxes, if there is a jump forward that we see, or if it's just continual movement. It could be interesting.
So one more thing on this whole concept of the Trump administration and what they're going to be doing next year after they come in office with respect to energy. And I think there's been a lot of conversations I've had with clients lately that are thinking that it's going to be all of a sudden we're just unleashing, we'll see a step change in the number of rigs that are drilling, and it's going to be a big change. But the thing to keep in mind is that companies are drilling new wells based on how much cash flow they're generating from existing operations. And I don't think that's going to change going forward. So I think while we will see maybe a shift in where some of that drilling occurs, maybe that'll go into more federal lands if they can get permits for wells, over the next few years. But I don't expect to see all of a sudden the industry going gangbusters, because if they flood the market with a bunch of oil and gas, and that's just going to depress prices, frankly, they don't have that money to go spend. Those days are over where shareholders would allow companies to go, spend more than they made in terms of free cash flow. So I think that's really something to keep in mind is regardless of whoever ends up in these cabinet positions is that the industry is going to look at developing our energy in a fiscally responsible manner now and into the future. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, you said it, Matt, and we were talking after the last show that we recorded about, the people are confusing that Trump was, the sole reason for the revolution that was happening in the last term. And it was a perfect alignment of, cheap money, investors wanting to drill, new technology, and that magic is not recreated right now. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And hopefully people aren't too disappointed, the ones that are really banking on that just to go gangbusters. So Matt, our next story here gets into the lithium. And so there's some interesting developments. It looks like, everybody's kind of getting a piece of the pie when it comes to some of the operators. And Occidental is the one in the news right now. So the story here says Occidental Petroleum has become the latest oil and gas player to stake out acreage in the emerging lithium play in the U.S. state of Arkansas, joining rivals such as ExxonMobil and Equinor in the pursuit of extracting the valuable battery metal from brines. And Matt, this has been all of the rage in the news as far as extraction goes. We were looking at some stories. It looks like a lot of this talk was happening back in June of this year. And so timing's about right for them to say more. And the CEO of Oxy, Vicky Hullab, told Energy Intelligence that all we've done is get some leases right now. So it kind of sounds like in Oxy's case, it's moving, but it's moving somewhat slowly. And they're kind of going through this in a very smart way. Another big thing that happened back in June was Terra Lithium subsidiary, which is a Berkshire Hathaway energy company. They partnered or did a joint venture with Oxy. And so basically that gives them the processing plant where they can process that lithium that they're bringing up. And like we talked about in a couple previous shows, that's really where the pinch point is right now. They feel confident they can extract it through the brine, but they don't have any way to process it out of the brine. And that's where development seems to be happening.
Yeah, this is where the technology, like we talked about in our last news episode, how companies are trying to position themselves with companies that have this proprietary technology for direct lithium extraction, and so that they can run the brine through these units and then extract the lithium, get the water and the other residual stuff back so that they can then inject it back underground. And so I don't know what kind of technology Oxy has access to, but certainly they are one of the largest oil and gas companies, and they have a large R&D focus. And so I would not be surprised if they've got something baking underneath their Terra Lithium subsidiary, like you mentioned, Justin, which they've been focused in California, of all places, in the Salton Sea area, and looking at how do they deploy this type of technology there. And so it's interesting to see that they've done a bunch of leasing in Arkansas to position themselves to hopefully deploy that technology there as well. So yeah, an interesting development. Certainly it's worth taking note when you have companies like ExxonMobil and Oxy that are spending money to position themselves in an area. So I think it really just is a very bullish signal for lithium extraction in the U.S. Obviously it's starting in Arkansas, but there's a lot of other plays like we've talked about, like the Marcellus in Pennsylvania and other places where there is a lot of lithium in the produced water that is ripe for development. So it'll be interesting to see what happens from here. But yeah, an interesting signal. And I think if you have minerals and royalties in that Northwest Louisiana, Southern Arkansas, East Texas area, then that's certainly something to be positioning yourself when you negotiate a lease to make sure you're protecting your rights to the lithium and not signing that away or not being silent on that. I think that is important. And then, yeah, hopefully we'll get some good news coming in terms of the royalty rate application, which is the next article here, Justin.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. And it's an update of something we've talked about previously, but the State Oil and Gas Commission denied the royalty rate application for lithium extraction in Arkansas, which, if listeners don't remember, there was a stink made by mineral owners because some of the terms were more like a mining lease than handling it in an oil and gas way. And obviously that brings up a lot of concern because mineral owners want to be paid fairly. And so you'll know better, Matt, who it was that brought up this bill. Somebody brought up a bill to try to kind of readjust this. And the next update is, it looks like the Arkansas Oil and Gas Commission denied it.
Yeah, so the 5 main companies that are active right now in Arkansas applied to the Arkansas Oil and Gas Commission to set the lithium brine royalty at 1.82%. There was a lot of protest from landowners on that because they felt it was way too low. Just for reference, as many of you listening will know, is the historical minimum royalty rate for oil and gas has been 1/8, so that's 12.5%. And most oil and gas leases that are signed today are typically for around a 3/16 lease, or even 20% or even 25% royalties. So 1.82% seems extremely low. And the South Arkansas Minerals Association, which is a group that represented mineral owners, basically had proposed rates of 12.5%, which the lithium industry said, oh, that's way too high. It will prevent us from being competitive globally. And so basically they were sort of at a stalemate because the commission said, well, we want to see the financial justification for that royalty rate, and the operators didn't want to share that information in the hearing, and so they denied the application, rightfully so. So they got to go back to the drawing board, and then hopefully those companies can come up with the reasoning to set a fair royalty.
Yeah, you said it, Matt. This brings up a really good fight, and it looks like on both sides there were some people that were glad that it was a no. Robert Reynolds of the South Arkansas Minerals Association said that, I appreciate the commission seeing through the issues, and if given the choice between yes to that application and no, that he would have picked no. And so it really is just a continuing conversation where the two sides are going to go back and forth, and hopefully we'll get some pressure from the courts to expose some of the financial information, and that'll kind of keep people honest to making the right decision. But it doesn't sound like the fight is over. It just sounds like folks are not really quite sure yet how to set a rate that really makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, and honestly, I think they're bluffing a little bit and saying, oh, we're just going to leave Arkansas unless there's a favorable royalty rate. And I suppose, if they set it too high, then that could be the case. But I have a hard time believing that a 12.5% royalty would cause those projects to become uneconomic. So, it's interesting that the tactics that they're taking, and it's just like, any negotiation, they're going to say, oh, of course, we can't do it. We're going to leave Arkansas if you don't set it at that 1.82. But then, you got to remember that you want to treat people fairly, and it seems like the Arkansas Oil and Gas Commission is balanced and trying to do the right thing and take this seriously, which is good because I think they're going to set the precedent here for other states to follow. So whatever royalty rate they come up with here, I would expect that we'll see that as kind of the norm going forward for other states to employ. So that'll be interesting to see how it goes, and hopefully, again, we can get a little bit higher and a fair royalty for mineral and royalty owners.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And related to our last story that we just covered, but in May 2024, Equinor announced a deal with Standard Lithium that made it invest up to $130 million in lithium projects in Texas. And so it'll be interesting to see if other states start to get into this pickle faster than Arkansas can make it through this negotiation. But I'm sure other states are, keeping an eye on this, and without a doubt, other operators in other states are keeping an eye on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So next, Matt, last but not least, always, we've got our rig count here. So it looks like we are pretty flat. We lost one unit on the land for last week, and this unit that we went down was in Wyoming. And aside from that, it looks like it's been pretty stable. Not a whole lot of change week over week, and interesting to see. It's kind of what we expected. It'll be interesting to see if this starts to increase, though. And something we were talking about in one of our previous lithium shows is it'll be interesting to see if rigs start to show up here that are lithium, such as the Arkansas rigs, or how those are going to be tracked, because it's kind of a question mark right now. I don't know if it is to you, Matt, whether those are included in this or whether those are separate from this.
Yeah, and apologize for the background noise. I have some gardeners here that are at the neighbor's house next door. But yeah, basically, I think that this tracks oil and gas rigs. So yeah, to your point, maybe that's not included yet. But if there's a big boom in drilling for lithium, then certainly I would think they would add it to the rig count. But yeah, pretty much status quo, 567 rigs versus 568 the week before. And then a year ago, we were at 603. So it's, I think to the point of just being in status quo mode right now.
Yep, you said it, Matt. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how, if regulations ease, if this starts to creep up. But as you had mentioned, there's no expectation there's going to be this huge jump, but a steady increase. Perhaps we'll see that, and that would be good to see.
Yeah, I think, if you see oil or gas prices go higher, then I would expect the rig count to go up accordingly. That's really the big driver at this point. So good to see that not a big change. And again, towards the end of the year, that's usually the case. So we'll see what happens next year, and we'll go from there. So, All right, well, that wraps it up for our last news episode of 2024. Thanks again for listening. And as always, you can find links to the articles mentioned in the show notes at mineralrightspodcast.com. Thanks again, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.